What happens when a CEO slips into the skin of an ordinary man, walking into his own empire to uncover the truth behind its tarnished reputation? James Harper, the founder of Harper Motors, was about to find out. At 45, he had built a chain of 12 car dealerships from a single dusty lot in a small town, a testament to his grit and a promise he made long ago to run a business that treated people right. But lately, something felt off. Customer complaints were flooding his inbox. Rude staff, hidden fees, financing deals that trapped buyers in debt. His executives brushed it off as minor issues, but James wasn't buying it. He'd poured his soul into Harper Motors, and the thought of it becoming just another predatory dealership gnawed at him like rust on a neglected chassis. He needed to see the truth for himself, and there was only one way to do it. Go undercover. James stood in his corner office on the top floor of Harper Motors headquarters, staring out at the city skyline. The glass walls reflected his silhouette, tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair just starting to gray at the temples. His tailored suit and polished shoes screamed success, but his eyes carried the weight of doubt. On his desk sat a framed photo of his father, a construction worker who'd once been swindled by a slick-talking car salesman. The memory burned in James's mind. His father coming home defeated, the family savings drained by a loan with interest rates that climbed like a runaway engine. That moment had sparked James's dream to build a dealership where trust wasn't just a slogan painted on a sign. But now, 20 years later, that dream felt like it was slipping through his fingers. He turned from the window and picked up his phone, scrolling through the latest complaints. Pushy sales tactics, hidden fees in the contract. They laughed when I said I couldn't afford it. Each one felt like a personal betrayal. His chief operations officer, Paul Donovan, had assured him during their last meeting that the issues were isolated, just a few bad apples. Paul's voice, smooth and confident over the conference call, echoed in James's head. We're hitting our numbers, James. Don't sweat the small stuff. But James had built Harper Motors from nothing. He knew the small stuff could rot a business from the inside out. He couldn't shake the feeling that his company had drifted far from the values he'd etched into its foundation. That evening, James sat in a dimly lit studio across town, facing a professional disguise artist named Carla. She was a wiry woman with sharp eyes and a knack for transforming faces. You sure about this? She asked, holding up a mirror to show James his new look. Gone was the polished CEO. In his place was Tom Bennett, a middle-aged everyman with thinning, graying hair, wire-rimmed glasses, and a slight hunch that suggested a life of hard work. His cheap polo shirt clung awkwardly to his frame, and his scuffed sneakers squeaked faintly on the floor. A sewed prosthetic added a limp to his gait, completing the illusion. James studied his reflection, barely recognizing himself. Perfect, he said, his voice steady but his heart racing. This was it, his chance to see Harper Motors through the eyes of a customer. Carla raised an eyebrow. You're walking into your own dealership looking like this? Ballsy move. What if they figure you out? James smirked, adjusting the glasses. They won't. I've never set foot in this location. My face is just a name on a letterhead to them. She shrugged, packing up her tools. Just don't get too caught up playing spy. People don't like being fooled, even if it's for a good cause. James nodded, but his mind was already elsewhere, picturing the dealership he'd chosen for his experiment, the flagship Harper Motors location in the heart of the city, a gleaming showroom that raked in millions but had the highest number of complaints. If something was rotten, it would be here. The next morning, James drove to the dealership in a borrowed, beat-up hatchback, the kind of car a guy like Tom Bennett would own. The sun glinted off the dealership's glass facade as he pulled into the lot, his stomach tightening. The building was a monument to his success. Polished chrome, rows of gleaming cars, and a massive sign that read Harper Motors. trust in every turn. But as he stepped out, the air felt charged, like the calm before a storm. Salespeople lingered near the entrance, their eyes scanning him like hawks sizing up prey. One glance at his faded jeans and worn shoes, and they turned away, dismissing him as a low-value target. James's jaw tightened. This wasn't the welcome he'd envisioned when he built this place. Inside, the showroom was a cathedral of commerce glossy floors, reflecting LED lights, the scent of fresh leather and wax, hanging heavy in the air. A young salesman in a sharp suit leaned against a counter, laughing with a colleague about a customer who couldn't afford a tire, let alone a car. James's fists clenched in his pockets. He wandered toward a row of used sedans, pretending to browse while his ears stayed sharp. The energy was all wrong, less like a place to help people, and more like a casino where the house always won. Across the lot, a morning meeting was wrapping up in a glass-walled office. James caught snippets through the open door. Paul Donovan, the sales manager, stood at the head of the room, his crisp suit and slick-back hair radiating authority. "Numbers don't lie, people," Paul said, his voice carrying a practiced edge. "We're behind on our monthly targets. Push the financing plan's hard-low monthly payments up front. They'll mention the rates unless they ask. And if they can't afford it, move on. We're not running a charity." The sales team nodded, some eagerly, others with tight smiles. James's stomach churned. This wasn't just a few bad apples. This was a system cultivated and enforced. He turned away, his eyes landing on a man standing alone near a beat-up sedan in the used car section. The man, probably in his mid-50s, wore a faded work uniform, his hands fidgeting nervously at his sides. His face was lined with worry, and his boots were caked with dust from a construction site. James felt a pang of recognition. This could have been his father years ago, standing in a dealership, hoping for a fair shake. He edged closer, pretending to inspect a nearby car, his ears tuned to the man's conversation with a salesman who approached him. The salesman, whose name tag read Ryan Baxter, was young, tall, and carried himself with the kind of swagger that screamed overconfidence. His smirk was sharp enough to cut glass. "Looking for something cheap, huh?" Ryan said, his tone dripping with condescension. The older man nodded, his voice low. "Yeah, just need something reliable. My truck died, and I gotta get to work." Ryan laughed, a sound that made James's blood simmer. "Cheap and reliable? Good luck, buddy. This isn't a junkyard." The man's shoulders slumped, and James felt a surge of anger. He wanted to step in, to rip off the disguise and demand answers, but he forced himself to stay in character. He needed to see more, to understand how deep this rot went. Back in his office the previous week, James had stood over that photo of his father, promising himself he'd never let Harper Motors become the kind of place that preyed on people like him. Now, standing in his own dealership, watching a customer being dismissed like garbage, that promise felt like a lie. His heart pounded as he made a silent vow. Whatever he found today, he'd fix it. No matter the cost. As he moved toward the showroom, his limp more pronounced under the weight of what he'd seen, James knew this was just the beginning. The truth was uglier than he'd feared, but he was ready to face it. Harper Motors was his legacy, and he'd be damned if he let it become a machine that crushed people's hopes. Today, Tom Bennett would keep watching, listening, and waiting. But soon, James Harper would step out of the shadows, and when he did, everything would change. James Harper, still cloaked in the guise of Tom Bennett, stood in the used car lot of Harper Motors, his scuffed sneakers crunching against the gravel. The morning sun beat down on rows of gleaming vehicles, their price tags fluttering in the breeze like bait on a hook. The air carried the faint tang of motor oil and desperation, a stark contrast to the polished showroom just beyond the glass doors. James's heart was still pounding from what he'd overheard moments ago. Ryan Baxter, a cocky young salesman, dismissing a customer with a sneer that cut deeper than words. The customer, a man in his mid-50s with a weathered face and a faded construction uniform, had looked defeated, his hands stuffed into his pockets as he shuffled toward a beat-up sedan. James had seen enough to know something was deeply wrong, but he needed more than a single incident to understand the full scope of the rot in his dealership. He adjusted his glasses, forcing himself to stay in character, and moved closer to the action. The man, whose name James would soon learn was Daniel Brooks, stood beside a 2010 sedan, its paint chipped but its tires still solid. He ran a calloused hand along the hood, his eyes scanning the price tag with a mix of hope and dread. Ryan Baxter, his name tag glinting in the sunlight, approached with a swagger that screamed he was more interested in closing a deal than helping. "Looking for something cheap, huh?" Ryan said, his voice laced with condescension, as if Daniel's presence was an inconvenience. "This one's the lowest we've got, and even that's probably out of your league." Daniel's shoulders stiffened, but he kept his tone steady. "I just need something reliable. My truck broke down, and I've got to get to the construction site. I don't have much, but I can do financing." Ryan let out a sharp laugh, loud enough to draw glances from other salespeople nearby. "Financing? With what credit?" "Look, buddy, this isn't a charity lot. That rust bucket's $8,000. And you'd need a down payment we both know you can't cover." He pointed to the sedan, his smirk widening. "You're better off checking Craigslist, or maybe a bicycle shop." A couple of salesmen in the background snickered, their eyes flicking to Daniel's warm boots and dusty uniform. Daniel's face flushed, his jaw tightening as he muttered, "Thanks anyway," and turned to leave, his steps heavy with humiliation. James's fists clenched in his pockets, his cheap polo shirt suddenly feeling too tight. He wanted to rip off the disguise, march over, and fire Ryan on the spot, but he forced himself to breathe. He'd come here to see the truth, not just one bad apple but the whole orchard. If he acted now, he might miss the bigger picture, the system that lets someone like Ryan thrive. Instead, he followed Daniel, keeping his limp pronounced as he jogged to catch up. "Sir," James called, his voice softer than he felt. "Hey, I couldn't help but overhear." That was out of line. "You okay?" Daniel stopped, turning with a wary glance. His eyes were tired, etched with lines that spoke of long days and longer nights. "It's fine," he said, rubbing his temple. "I should have known better. Dealerships see guys like me and don't even bother." James shook his head, the anger still simmering. "That's not how it should be." Daniel hesitated, then sighed. "Lost my wife last year. Cancer. Medical bills cleaned me out. My truck lasted as long as it could, but now it's gone. I work construction miss a day. I don't eat. Guess I'll figure something out." He forced a weak smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. James's stomach twisted. This was his father all over again, same story, same shame. He wanted to promise Daniel a car right then, but Tom Bennett wasn't supposed to have that kind of power. Instead, he said, "Look, let me see what I can do. I know a guy who helps people find decent used cars at fair prices. No scams." Daniel's brow furrowed, skeptical. "That's kind of you, but I don't think anyone's helping me out of charity." James smiled, careful to keep it casual. "It's not charity. It's the right thing." After a long pause, Daniel nodded. "All right. If you think you can help." He gave his name, Daniel Brooks, and a phone number. James saved it, his mind already racing with plans to make this right dot as Daniel walked off. James turned back to the dealership, his jaw tight. Ryan's behavior wasn't just a personal failing. It was a symptom of something bigger, a culture that had taken root under his nose. He needed to see more. He stepped into the showroom, where the air was cooler, the scent of leather and polish almost suffocating. A young saleswoman approached, her smile polite but guarded. Her name tag read Sarah Mitchell. "Hi, welcome in," she said, her voice professional but warm. "Looking for anything specific?" James played his role, scratching his head. "Yeah, something reliable, not too pricey. Maybe a used model." Sarah nodded, leading him toward a row of compact cars. She glanced around, then lowered her voice. "Just a heads up, the financing team here can be pushy, bell throw. Low monthly payments at you, but the interest rates are brutal. Read everything before you sign." James raised an eyebrow, surprised by her candor. "That bad, huh?" Sarah hesitated, her eyes flickering with unease. "Let's just say they don't always explain things clearly. Hidden fees, high rates. Some folks don't realize what they're in for until it's too late." Her voice was quiet, like she was afraid of being overheard. James's stomach tightened. This was his dealership, built on a promise of fairness, and his own employees were warning customers about traps. Before he could probe further, a sharp voice cut through the air. "Sarah, what are you doing?" A man in his 40s strode over, his suit crisp, his expression colder than the showroom's air conditioning. His name tag read Paul Donovan, sales manager. Sarah straightened, her face tightening. "Just helping a customer, Paul." Paul barely glanced at James, his eyes fixed on Sarah. "If you've got time to chat, you've got time to close deals. Move it." Sarah clenched her jaw, but gave James an apologetic look before walking away. Paul turned to James, his demeanor shifting to a polished smile. "Sorry about that. She's still learning. What can I help you with?" James forced a casual grin, playing the part of Tom Bennett. "Just looking for something affordable." Paul nodded, his eyes gleaming with calculation. "We've got plenty of options. Don't worry about the price. We'll make the numbers work." James recognized the tactic immediately. Hook the customer with vague promises, then bury them in paperwork. Paul led him to an office, where a finance officer named Mark Sullivan joined them. The pitch was smooth, almost rehearsed a low monthly payment. But when James pressed for details, Mark glossed over the interest rate, which James calculated in his head was nearly 20%. If he were a real customer, he'd be locked into a deal. That would bleed him dry. As they talked, a commotion erupted outside. A woman in her late 60s, her gray hair pulled into a tight bun, was arguing with Ryan Baxter near the reception desk. "I was promised a fair deal," she snapped, her voice trembling. "Now you're saying my payments are $200 more than we agreed." Ryan shrugged, his smirk infuriatingly casual. "Ma'am, you signed the contract. It's all in there. Should have read it." The woman's hand shook as she clutched a stack of papers. "You rushed me through it." "You didn't explain any of this." Ryan leaned back, unfazed. "Not my problem. If you can't afford it, maybe you shouldn't be buying a car." James's patience was fraying. This wasn't just one bad salesman. It was systemic, a culture that rewarded deception and punished vulnerability. He glanced at Mark, who shifted uncomfortably, avoiding his gaze. Paul, still standing nearby, didn't intervene, his silence a tacit approval of Ryan's behavior. James's mind flashed back to his father, signing a contract he didn't understand, trusting a salesman who saw him as nothing more than a commission. The weight of that memory fueled his resolve. He needed more evidence, more proof of how deep this went. But every moment he stayed silent felt like a betrayal of the promise he'd made when he founded Harper Motors. He excused himself from the office, muttering something about needing to think it over, and stepped outside to clear his head. The lot was quieter now, the morning rush slowing to a trickle. James pulled out his phone, staring at Daniel's contact information. He could help Daniel now, blow his cover and fix one injustice. But that wouldn't solve the bigger problem. His dealership was failing people like Daniel, like the woman arguing with Ryan, like his father all those years ago. He needed to see this through, to uncover every crack in the system before he could rebuild it. But as he slipped the phone back into his pocket, one thing was clear. Harper Motors was broken, and James Harper was the only one who could fix it. The showroom of Harper Motors buzzed with a deceptive calm, its glossy floors reflecting the glare of overhead lights like a stage set for betrayal. James Harper, still cloaked as Tom Bennett, stood near a sleek sedan, his cheap polo shirt damp with sweat beneath the weight of what he'd seen. The air was thick with the scent of leather and lies, and every word he'd overheard in the past hour fueled the fire in his chest. Ryan Baxter's cruel dismissal of Daniel Brooks, a struggling construction worker, had been bad enough. Then came Sarah Mitchell's whispered warning about predatory financing, followed by the slick, deceptive pitch from Paul Donovan and Mark Sullivan, who tried to trap Tom in a ruinous loan. But now, a new scene unfolded, one that pushed James to the edge of his restraint. A woman's trembling voice cut through the showroom, raw with frustration and betrayal. She was in her late 60s, her gray hair pulled into a tight bun, her hands clutching a crumpled contract as she faced Ryan Baxter near the reception desk. Her name, James would later learn, was Linda Carter, a retired schoolteacher who trusted Harper Motors to help her buy a reliable car for her granddaughter. "I was promised a fair deal," Linda snapped, her voice shaking but defiant. "You told me $250 a month, and now my payments are $450. How am I supposed to afford that on a pension?" Ryan leaned against the counter, his smirk as sharp as ever, his name tag glinting under the lights. "Ma'am, you signed the paperwork," he said, his tone dripping with indifference. "It's all in there. Should have read it before you put your name on it." Linda's face flushed, her hands trembling as she waved the contract. "You rushed me through it. You didn't explain the interest rate or the fees. I trusted you." Ryan shrugged, unfazed. "Not my problem. If you can't afford it, maybe you shouldn't have bought the car. Next time, bring a lawyer." A few salespeople nearby stifled laughs, their eyes flicking to Linda's worn coat and sensible shoes, marking her as an easy target. The showroom's polished veneer cracked, revealing the ugliness beneath a culture that thrived on exploiting trust. James's heart pounded, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge of a car hood. He'd seen enough. The memory of his father, humiliated by a salesman decades ago, flashed in his mind, overlapping with Daniel's defeated slump and Linda's shaking hands. This wasn't just a bad day or a rogue employee. This was Harper Motors, his legacy, turned into a machine that chewed up people's hopes. He'd come undercover to uncover the truth, and the truth was worse than he'd feared. His plan to gather more evidence dissolved under the weight of Linda's plea. He couldn't stand by any longer, not as Tom Bennett, not as anyone. He straightened, his limp forgotten, and strode toward the reception desk, his steps deliberate. Ryan turned, his smirk faltering as he sensed something shift in the air. "Sir, if you're looking for a deal, I can." James cut him off, his voice low but sharp, slicing through the showroom's hum like a blade. "I don't need a deal." "Ryan." He removed his glasses, wiping his face with a slow, deliberate motion, letting the disguise fall away. The graying hair and cheap clothes couldn't hide the steel in his eyes or the authority in his stance. "I own this dealership." The room froze. Ryan's smirk vanished, his face paling as if the air had been sucked out of him. Linda stopped mid-sentence, her eyes wide with confusion. Paul Donovan, who'd been watching from a nearby office, stepped out, his crisp suit suddenly looking too tight. Mark Sullivan, still seated at the finance desk, sank deeper into his chair, his pen clattering to the floor. Sarah Mitchell, standing near a display car, covered her mouth, her eyes darting between James and the stunned salespeople. The showroom, moments ago alive with casual cruelty, was now a tableau of shock and dread. James let the silence stretch, his gaze locked on Ryan. "You humiliated a man today," he said, his voice calm but laced with fury. "Daniel Brooks came here looking for a chance, and you mocked him, told him to buy a bicycle. And now you're doing the same to this woman." He nodded toward Linda, who clutched her contract tighter, tears welling in her eyes. Ryan opened his mouth, his voice hoarse. I was just... James raised a hand, silencing him. "You're fired." Ryan's face turned red, his shock giving way to defiance. "You can't just..." "I just did," James said, his tone final. He turned to Paul, whose polished demeanor was crumbling, his eyes darting toward the exit. "And you, Paul. You trained this team to deceive, to push people into traps they can't escape. You let this culture fester. You're done too." Paul's jaw clenched, his voice low. "James, Mr. Harper, this is how dealerships work. If we don't push financing, we lose money. If we don't close deals, customers walk. It's the business." James's gaze hardened, his voice dropping to a dangerous calm. "No, that's how bad dealerships work. And if that's what you believe, you don't belong here." Paul opened his mouth, then closed it, his confidence shattered. He turned and walked toward his office, his steps heavy, knowing there was no salvaging this. The employees watched, some whispering, others frozen. James turned to the room, his heart still racing but his resolve unshaken. "Anyone else have something to say?" he asked, his voice steady but carrying an edge. "If you've been misleading customers, pushing them into bad deals, now's the time to come clean." Silence hung heavy, broken only by the faint hum of the air conditioning. Then, a voice cut through a gruff, skeptical tone from the back of the room. "This is a mistake," said John Hayes, a veteran salesman in his 50s, his arms crossed. "You fire Ryan and Paul, fine. But you can't change how this place runs without tanking it. Customers don't care about fair. They want cheap. And we give it to them. You're gonna regret this." James met John's stare, recognizing the challenge. John wasn't like Ryan. He was loyal, hardworking, but wedded to the old ways. "If you think that, John, you're free to leave," James said, his voice firm. John's eyes narrowed, but he didn't move, the tension between them crackling like a live wire. James knew he'd have to watch John closely. His defiance could spread, poisoning the changes James planned to make. He turned to Sarah, who stood rigid, her eyes wide with a mix of awe and fear. "Sarah," he said, softening his tone, "you warned me about the financing tricks. You told the truth when you didn't have to. That's the kind of integrity this place needs." Sarah blinked, her voice barely a whisper. "I just didn't want people getting hurt." James nodded. "That's why you're staying. We're gonna need people like you." He faced Linda, who was still clutching her contract, tears now streaking her face. "Ma'am," he said, his voice gentle but resolute, "I'm sorry for what you've been through. We'll fix your contract. No hidden fees, no surprises. You have my word." Linda's shoulders shook, her voice breaking. "Thank you. Thank you so much." The room watched, the weight of her gratitude shifting the air, a flicker of hope amid the wreckage. James exhaled, his heart still pounding. The dealership was a mess, his mess. He'd built it, and somewhere along the way, he'd let it stray from the promise he'd made to his father, to himself. But standing in the center of the showroom, surrounded by nervous employees and stunned customers, he felt a spark of clarity. This was his chance to rebuild, to make Harper Motors what it was meant to be. "Things are changing," he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. "Effective immediately. No more deception. No more treating people like numbers. We do this right, or we don't do it at all." The employees exchanged glances. some relieved, others uncertain. John Hayes's scowl lingered, a reminder that not everyone would follow. James knew this was just the start. Firing Ryan and Paul was a blow, but changing a culture would take more than one dramatic reveal. His mind flashed to Daniel Brooks, the man Ryan had humiliated, and the promise he'd made to help. That would come next. For now, he stood firm, the weight of his legacy pressing down but fueling his resolve. Harper Motors would rise again, and James Harper would lead the way. The showroom of Harper Motors was quieter now, the echoes of James Harper's reveal still lingering like dust settling after a storm. The glossy floors and gleaming cars stood unchanged, but the air felt different, charged with a mix of uncertainty and possibility. Employees whispered in corners, their eyes darting toward James as he stood in the center of the room. No longer Tom Bennett, but the CEO, who just fired his sales manager and a top salesman. Ryan Baxter's desk was already empty, his belongings swept into a box he'd carried out in a huff. Paul Donovan's office door was closed, his nameplate removed, a stark reminder of the upheaval. James's heart still raced from the confrontation, but his resolve was ironclad. He'd seen the rot in his dealership, humiliation of customers like Daniel Brooks, deception in deals like Linda Carter's, and he'd vowed to fix it. Now, the real work began. James turned to Sarah Mitchell, who stood near a display car, her hands clasped tightly as if bracing for what came next. Her warning about the dealership's predatory financing had been a rare spark of integrity in a sea of deceit, and James saw in her the kind of leader Harper Motors needed. "Sarah," he said, his voice steady, cutting through the murmurs. "Step up here." Her eyes widened, but she walked forward, her steps hesitant. The other employees watched, some curious, others skeptical. "You showed courage today," James continued. "You told me the truth about the financing traps, even when it could have cost you. That's the kind of leadership this place has been missing. Starting now, you're the new sales manager." A ripple of surprise passed through the room. Sarah's lips parted, her voice barely audible. "Me? Mr. Harper, I've only been here 2 years. James smiled, a rare warmth breaking through his intensity. "You care about the customers. You do things the right way. That's what matters. You're ready." Sarah's cheeks flushed, but she nodded, a flicker of determination in her eyes. "I won't let you down," she said, her voice gaining strength. A few employees nodded in approval, but others, like John Hayes, a grizzled veteran with arms crossed in the back, looked unimpressed. James noted John's scowl, knowing the man's earlier defiance could spell trouble, but he let it pass for. Now, Sarah's promotion was a signal. A new era was beginning. James's next move was personal. He pulled out his phone and dialed Daniel Brooks, the construction worker Ryan had humiliated earlier that morning. The line rang twice before Daniel's cautious voice answered. "Hello? Daniel, it's James Harper," he said, pausing to let the name sink in. "The owner of Harper Motors." A long silence followed, then Daniel's voice, tight with disbelief. "Wait, what?" James smiled slightly. "I was there today, undercover, when you came in. I saw what happened with Ryan. I'm sorry, and I want to make it right. Come back to the dealership. We'll find you a car, fair price, no tricks." Another pause. Then Daniel's voice softened. "You mean actually sell me something? Not just laugh me off?" "Exactly," James said. "Be here in an hour." Daniel exhaled, a mix of relief and skepticism. "All right, I'll be there." James hung up and turned to the employees, who were still processing Sarah's promotion. "This dealership was built to help people, not prey on them," he said, his voice carrying the weight of conviction. "Starting today, we're rewriting the rules. No more pushing bad deals. No more treating customers like paychecks. If you're not on board, you know where the door is." Most nodded, some hesitantly, But John Hayes' scowl deepened, his silence louder than words. James knew he'd have to deal with John soon, but first, he needed to deliver on his promise to Daniel Dodd an hour later. Daniel Brooks walked through the showroom doors, his work boots leaving faint dust trails on the pristine tiles. His eyes darted around, braced for another round of dismissal. James stepped forward, extending a hand. "Daniel, glad you came back." Daniel shook his hand, his grip firm but wary. "Didn't think I'd hear from you," he admitted. James nodded. "I keep my word. Let's get you taken care of." He gestured to Sarah, who stepped up with a cautious smile. "I'll help you find something reliable," she said. "Within your budget, no pressure." Sarah led Daniel to the used car section, James following at a distance, watching closely. The other salespeople, now aware of James's presence, stood straighter, their usual predatory glances replaced by nervous attentiveness. Sarah pointed out a 2015 sedan, its body clean and mileage low. "This one's got a solid engine, good maintenance history," she said, her tone professional but warm. "It'll last you years if you keep it up. We can work out financing that actually fits your situation." Daniel ran a hand along the hood, his skepticism softening. "No tricks?" he asked. Sarah met his gaze. "None. You'll see every number up front." They moved to an office where Mark Sullivan, the finance officer who'd earlier tried to push James into a bad deal, now sat with a stack of papers and a nervous expression. James stood nearby, his presence a silent reminder of the new rules. Mark walked Daniel through the financing, explaining every term interest rate, monthly payments, no hidden fees, with a clarity that felt foreign in this room. By the time Daniel signed the contract, his shoulders had relaxed, a faint smile breaking through. "Never thought I'd walk out of here with a car," he said, shaking James's hand. "Appreciate this, really." James met his gaze. "Tell people what happened today, Daniel. Let them know we're changing." Daniel nodded, his smile widening. "I can do that." As Daniel left with the keys to his new car, James felt a flicker of pride, the first in a long time. But the moment was short-lived. John Hayes approached, his voice low but sharp. "You think this is gonna work? Handing out cars like candy and putting a kid like Sarah in charge? You're gonna tank this place." James faced him, his voice calm but firm. "If making things right tanks us, then we were never built to last. You want to stay, John? Get on board. If not, you know the way out." John's eyes narrowed, but he turned and walked away, his silence a brewing storm. Sarah, meanwhile, began her first task as sales manager, retraining the team. In a meeting room, she stood before a dozen salespeople, some eager, others skeptical. "From now on, we focus on the customer," she said, her voice steady despite her nerves. "Explain every deal clearly. No pressure, no tricks. We build trust, not commissions." A few nodded, like Mark, who seemed relieved to shed the old ways. Others, like a young salesman named Tyler, rolled their eyes, whispering to a colleague that this won't last. Sarah caught the whisper but pressed on, outlining new sales strategies that prioritized long-term relationships over quick profits. As the day wore on, a new customer walked in, a woman in her 30s, her posture tense, her eyes scanning the showroom like she expected a trap. Her name was Emily Nguyen, and she bought a car from Harper Motors a year ago, only to discover hidden fees that ballooned her payments. She'd heard rumors of change and came to test them. Sarah greeted her, sensing her wariness. "I'm here to see if you're really different now," Emily said bluntly. Sarah nodded, unfazed. "Let me show you what we can do." She walked Emily through a selection of used cars, explaining options with a transparency that made Emily's guarded expression soften. By the time they sat down to discuss financing, Emily was smiling, a contract in hand that matched her budget. James watched from his office, a glass of water in hand, feeling the weight of the day settle. Sarah's leadership, Daniel's relief, Emily's cautious trust. These were steps forward, but small ones. John's defiance and the whispers among the staff reminded him that changing a culture wasn't a one-day fix. His phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. Told some guys at work about you. One's coming by tomorrow. Hope this is real. James smiled, typing back, It's real. See you soon. He leaned back, the Harper Motors sign visible through the window. The road ahead was long, but for the first time in years, he felt like his dealership was his again. The morning sun cast long shadows across the lot of Harper Motors, where rows of cars gleamed under a sky that promised heat. Inside the showroom, the air was cooler but heavier, thick with the tension of a business in flux. James Harper stood in his office, a cup of black coffee cooling on his desk as he reviewed the latest sales reports. The numbers were grim, a 15% dip in revenue since he'd fired Ryan Baxter and Paul Donovan, a direct result of his push for transparent financing and honest sales. His vision for a reformed Harper Motors, built on trust, not tricks, was taking root, but the cost was steeper than he'd expected. Sarah Mitchell, the newly promoted sales manager, was proving her worth, and customers, like Daniel Brooks, were spreading the word about the dealership's changes. But not everyone was on board, and the cracks in James's plan were starting to show in the break room. John Hayes, the veteran salesman who challenged James's reforms, leaned against a vending machine, his voice low but sharp as he spoke to a cluster of employees. "This honesty nonsense is gonna sink us," he said, his grizzled face set in a scowl. "We're bleeding sales because Harper's playing saint. You think customers care about fair deals? They want low prices, and if we don't give, they'll go to Prestige Auto across town." A young salesman, Tyler, nodded eagerly, while others shifted uncomfortably. "I heard some of the old crew are jumping ship to Prestige," Tyler added. "They're offering better commissions." John smirked. "Exactly. Harper's dreaming if he thinks we'll stick around for this." James overheard the tail end of the conversation as he passed by, his jaw tightening. John's defiance wasn't just a personal grudge. It was a virus, spreading doubt among a team already rattled by change. He'd hoped firing Paul and promoting Sarah would send a clear message. But John's influence ran deep, rooted in years of loyalty and a belief that deception was the only path to profit. James knew he couldn't fire John outright. The man's departure could trigger a mass exodus, gunning the dealership staff at a critical moment. He needed to neutralize John's resistance without alienating the team. The pressure wasn't just internal. That afternoon, James met with his CFO, Karim Walsh, who'd flown in from headquarters to review the financials. In a glass-walled conference room, Karim spread out spreadsheets, her expression grim. "James, your new policies are noble, but they're hurting us," she said, tapping a line graph showing the revenue drop. "Customers are walking when we don't offer aggressive financing. Our margins are razor thin, and shareholders are asking questions. If this continues, we'll need to cut staff or scale back operations." James leaned back, his fingers steepled. "We're losing short-term sales, Karen, but we're building trust. That's what'll keep us alive long-term," Karen sighed. "I hope you're right, but the board's not patient. You've got a month to turn this around, or they'll push for a return to the old model." As James processed the warning, Sarah faced her own challenges on the sales floor. During a morning training session, she outlined new protocols, full disclosure of loan terms, no pressure tactics, and follow-up calls to ensure customer satisfaction. Most of the team listened, but a few, egged on by John's whispers, pushed back. "This feels like we're babysitting customers," Tyler complained, his arms crossed. They'll just shop around for better rates. Sarah kept her cool, her voice firm. If we lose a sale because we're honest, that's fine. We're not here to trap people. A veteran saleswoman, Maria, spoke up, her tone hesitant but supportive. I like it, Sarah. I'm tired of feeling slimy after every deal. The room split, some nodding with Maria, others glancing at John, who sat silently, his eyes cold. The skepticism wasn't limited to employees. That afternoon, a customer named Emily Nguyen returned. The woman Sarah had helped the previous day. She'd bought a car, but came back with questions, her trust still fragile. I saw online reviews saying Harper Motors is just pretending to change, Emily said, her voice sharp. Is this for real, or am I going to find another fee in my contract? Sarah met her gaze, unflinching. It's real, Miss Nguyen. Come to my office, and I'll walk you through every line again. Emily nodded, satisfied but cautious, a reminder that rebuilding Harper Motors' reputation would be a slow grind. The biggest threat came unexpectedly, in the form of Rachel Lee, a local investigative journalist with a reputation for exposing shady businesses. She arrived unannounced, her notebook in hand and a skeptical smile on her lips. Mr. Harper, she said, shaking his hand in the showroom, I've heard rumors about a shakeup here. Some say you're turning over a new leaf. Others say it's a PR stunt. Mind if I look around? James's pulse quickened, but he saw a chance to prove his sincerity. Welcome, Ms. Lee, he said, gesturing to the showroom. See for yourself. Ask anyone anything. Rachel nodded, her eyes already scanning the room, landing on John Hayes, who was watching her with thinly veiled hostility. Rachel shadowed Sarah for the afternoon, observing her interactions with customers and flipping through financing agreements. She interviewed employees, including Mark Sullivan, who admitted to past mistakes but praised the new transparency. It's a relief, Mark said, his voice earnest. I used to dread customers calling back, angry about hidden fees. Now, I can look them in the eye. Rachel's expression remained unreadable, her pen moving steadily. When she spoke to John, he was curt, dismissing the changes as unrealistic and bad for business. James watched from a distance, knowing Rachel's article could make or break Harper Motors' fledgling reputation. Amid the tension, a bright spot emerged. Daniel Brooks returned to the dealership, his new sedan parked outside, his face lit with gratitude. He approached James and Sarah, a younger man trailing behind him. This is my coworker, Jake, Daniel said, his voice steady. I told him what you did, how you helped me. He needs a car, and I said you'd treat him right. James shook Jake's hand, a warmth spreading through him. We will, Daniel. Thanks for trusting us. Sarah took Jake to browse models, explaining options with the same care she'd shown Daniel. As they walked away, Daniel turned to James. Word's getting out at the job site, he said. Guys like me, we talk. If you keep this up, you'll have a lot of us coming. James nodded, his resolve strengthened. We'll be here. That evening, James sat in his office, the showroom dark beyond the glass. Rachel had left with a promise to return, her article still a looming unknown. John's rebellion was gaining traction, and the financial numbers were a ticking clock. But Daniel's words echoed in his mind, a reminder of why he'd started this fight. He opened his laptop, drafting a plan for a community event to showcase Harper Motors' new direction, a chance to invite customers like Daniel and Emily to share their stories. It was a risk, but James knew trust couldn't be bought with ads or slogans. It had to be earned, one person at a time. As he typed, his phone buzzed with a text from Karan. Board's getting restless. Show results soon. James exhaled, the weight of the dealership's future pressing down. He'd faced long odds before, building Harper Motors from a single lot to a 12-location empire. This was just another challenge, one he'd meet with the same grit that had carried him this far. The road was rough, but for the first time in weeks, he felt a flicker of hope. Harper Motors was changing, and no matter what came next, James was ready to fight for it. The sun dipped low over the lot of Harper Motors, casting a golden glow across the rows of cars that stood like silent witnesses to a transformation. The dealership showroom buzzed with a different energy tonight, not the predatory hum of sales pitches, but the warm chatter of a community gathered for something new. James Harper stood near the entrance, his suit jacket unbuttoned, a rare smile softening the lines of his face. 2 weeks had passed since he'd revealed his identity, fired Ryan Baxter and Paul Donovan, and set Harper Motors on a path toward redemption. The road had been rocky, with John Hayes' rebellion, financial pressures, and the looming scrutiny of Rachel Lee's investigation. But tonight, as he surveyed the crowd of customers, employees, and locals gathered for Harper Motors' first community event, James felt a spark of pride he hadn't known in years. This was his dealership, his legacy, and it was starting to feel like home again. The event was Sarah Mitchell's brainchild, a bold move to showcase the dealership's new direction. Under her leadership as sales manager, the team had spent days transforming the lot into a welcoming space. Tables draped in blue cloths offered free coffee and sandwiches. A local band played soft acoustic tunes, and a banner stretched across the showroom read, "Harper Motors, trust in every term rebuilt." Customers like Daniel Brooks and Emily Nguyen mingled with employees, their stories of fair deals and honest service drawing curious locals. James had invited Rachel Lee, the journalist whose article could sway public opinion, and she stood near. A display car, her notebook open, her eyes sharp but less skeptical than before. Sarah took the microphone at the center of the lot, her voice steady despite the butterflies James knew she felt. "Thank you all for coming," she said, her words carrying over the crowd. "Harper Motors hasn't always been the place it should have been. We've made mistakes, but we're changing. Tonight's about showing you what we stand for now: honesty, respect, and community." She gestured to Daniel, who stood nearby, his work boots swapped for clean sneakers. "Daniel, would you share your story?" Daniel stepped forward, his hands fidgeting but his gaze steady. "A couple weeks ago, I came here needing a car to get to work," he said, his voice rough but clear. "I was broke, barely scraping. By after losing my wife, a salesman laughed me off, told me to buy a bicycle. I left feeling like nothing. But Mr. Harper called me back, got me a car I could afford, no tricks. Now I'm telling everyone I know Harper Motors is different." The crowd murmured, some nodding, others clapping. James caught Rachel's eye. Her pen moved quickly, a faint smile tugging at her lips. Emily Nguyen spoke next, her posture confident but her voice tinged with emotion. "I bought a car here last year and got burned hidden fees. Payments I couldn't handle," she said. "When I heard they were changing, I didn't believe it. But Sarah walked me through a new deal, showed me every number. I trust them now, and that's not something I thought I'd say." The applause grew louder, and Sarah's eyes shone with pride. James felt a warmth spread through him. The weight of the past weeks, John's defiance, the revenue dip, the board's pressure lifting. If only for a moment, Rachel's article, published that morning, had been a turning point. Titled Harper Motors, A Dealership's Redemption? It detailed James's undercover mission, the firing of Ryan and Paul, and the dealership's shift toward transparency. Rachel didn't sugarcoat the past, citing complaints like Linda Carter's and Emily's, but she praised the new policies and Sarah's leadership. "Time will tell if Harper Motors can sustain this change," she wrote. "But for now, they're proving trust can be rebuilt, one customer at a time." The article had gone viral locally, drawing curious customers to the event and boosting sales for the first time in weeks. James had framed a copy, hanging it in his office as a reminder of what was at stake, but the victory was fragile. Earlier that day, James had faced a new challenge. Prestige Auto, a rival dealership, had poached 2 of his salespeople, lured by higher commissions and promises of easier sales. John Hayes had been spotted meeting with Prestige's manager, fueling rumors he might jump ship and take more staff with him. James confronted John in the break room, his voice calm but firm. "If you want to go, John, I won't stop you," he said. "But if you stay, you'll see we can win by doing things right." John's eyes narrowed, his response curt. "We'll see." He hadn't left yet, but his presence was a shadow, a reminder that not everyone believed in James's vision. Sarah, too, faced resistance. A few salespeople, led by Tyler, had been caught slipping back into old habits, glossing over loan terms, pressuring customers to sign quickly. Sarah disciplined them, but the incident shook her confidence. In a quiet moment after the event, she confided in James. "I'm trying, but some of them don't listen," she said, her voice low. "What if I'm not cut out for this?" James placed a hand on her shoulder. "You're doing better than you know. Change takes time, Sarah. Keep showing them the way." She nodded, a spark of resolve returning, and James knew he'd made the right choice in her. As the event wound down, James took the microphone, the crowd's eyes on him. "This dealership is my family's legacy," he said, his voice steady but warm. "We lost our way, but you, customers, employees, neighbors, you're giving us a chance to make it right. We're not perfect, but we're committed. Thank you for being here." The applause was heartfelt, and James stepped back, his throat tight with emotion. Daniel approached, shaking his hand. "You meant it," he said. "This place is different," James smiled. "It's just the start." Daniel. Later, in his office, James sat alone, the showroom dark beyond the glass. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Heard about your event. I got burned by your dealership years ago. Thinking of coming by. Is it really different?" James typed back, "It is. Come see us." He leaned back, the Harper Motors sign glowing faintly outside. The financials were still tight, John's loyalty uncertain, and Prestige Auto's shadow loomed. But the event, Rachel's article, and voices like Daniel's and Emily's were proof that trust could be rebuilt. The road ahead was long, but James was ready to walk it, one honest deal at a time. This story of Harper Motors is more than a tale of a dealership's turnaround. It's a testament to the power of integrity, empathy, and second chances. James Harper's journey reminds us that leadership isn't just about profits. It's about standing by your values, even when the cost is high. His decision to go undercover, confront betrayal, and rebuild trust reflects a universal truth. Real change starts with accountability. Daniel Brooks, carrying the weight of loss but finding hope, shows the resilience of ordinary people. Sarah Mitchell, rising from uncertainty to leadership, proves that courage can come from unexpected places. And customers like Emily and Linda, scarred by deception yet willing to trust again, embody the human need for fairness. The lessons are clear. Businesses thrive not by exploiting trust, but by earning it. Mistakes can be mended, but only with transparency and action. And in a world often driven by greed, choosing humanity over profit is a radical act that ripples outward. Harper Motors' story challenges us to ask, what legacy are we building, and who are we serving? It's a call to lead with heart, to lift others up, and to believe that doing right can rewrite even the darkest chapters. If this story moved you, there's more to discover. Subscribe to Legacy Stories on YouTube for tales of courage, redemption, and human connection that inspire and uplift. Join our community, share your thoughts, and let's keep these stories alive. Click the button, ring the bell, and be part of the journey, because every story matters.